Hello there, welcome back to what is basically my best of the year video. It's a silly video. I mean, really, there's so many films I have not seen that I want to see this year because of where I live, which is not close to where a lot of the big films are released. So I haven't seen Triangle of Sadness, haven't seen Tar. There's so many films I haven't seen, so that's why I don't take this stuff too seriously. Even lists I don't take too seriously, because just listening to someone in a video tells you what you think of the film or not. And what's the best, what's the worst is kind of ridiculous. So I'm not trying to do a respect list. I'm just going with the ones I enjoyed most. I'm not trying to say this is the greatest thing ever, because I've missed so many films that I'll end up seeing next year probably. So I tend to catch things after they've been released for a while, so there we go. So that's why this list is not in any way complete. You should not take it all seriously, plus it's just someone's opinion, so just relax. So I'll start with one of my best films of the year, and this ranges from the highbrow to the a bit more silly, but these are films I enjoyed for what they were. So, Crimes of the Future, the Cronenberg film, was my favourite film of the year. It was on my best favourite films always list as well. It really hit me this year. It's a wonderful film. Just go see my video about it. It's great. It's about evolution and art and the bodies and how people change in the future and how they evolve and how they see themselves and how they express themselves. So it's a wonderful thing. It also looks about how people repress themselves and how this guilt creates parts of society and how expression creates parts of society and how it's all kind of interlinked. So it's a very complicated film. So that's a wonderful film. You should go see it. It's now available generally, so it's one to see. Next is 3,000 Years of Longing, the George Miller film that came and went and never really made much of an impact for most people. Most people didn't even know it was released, because this was George Miller's follow-up to Mad Max Fury Road. It was basically dumped, and a lot of people saw it, had mixed feelings about it. I loved it. It's about storytelling. It's about different how stories affect us. It really, again, it's one of those films that really got me in a way that was much beyond what the blockbusters got me. The blockbuster didn't get me as much as these films, really. So, 3,000 Years Long, I've done a video on it. Go see the video. It's got all my thoughts on this wonderful film. Then there's Licorice Pizza, another one I've done a video on. Paul Thomas Anderson's film about young romance in the 70s. Another really strong director-led film, very much in the same vein as is Punch Drunk Love and things like that, where it's about romance, but it's eccentric, and it's got a lot of heart, but it's also has characters who are got a lot of rough edges to them, so they're not always the easiest to deal with. So that's another terrific film. I put off watching it all year, but I finally got into it about the end. Then there's a Northman, which is the director of Lighthouse, Robert Eggers. This is wonderful. It's a revenge tale set in the land of the Vikings. It's violent, it's dark, it's full of characters who have emotions that are not easy to, describe to modern audiences, because their emotions are tied to their time, and for some people it'd be too brutal. The film's probably too brutal for a lot of people. It came out, it did okay, but it cost so much money. And it looks beautiful. They spent the money on the film. It's a gorgeous film. I adore this film, but it's not for everybody. Next is Pinocchio, the Del Toro Pinocchio. I hasten to add. The other Pinocchio will come up soon for a different kind of list. So, there will be a video on it coming along at the same time as, or maybe a day or two later than this video, about the Pinocchios. But this is Del Toro co-directing this version of Pinocchio that he wanted to do for years. He finally got money to make it through Netflix. They did a release in the cinema, but mainly it's from Netflix. I saw it on Netflix, but I projected it, so I managed to see it on a bigger screen. It is a wonderful film about loss, about nature. It's about the chaos of life and having to deal with it, and having to deal with imperfect solutions to life's problems, and fascism, and how fascism is a way to try and control the chaos of life, another very imperfect way of trying to control chaos, and how it becomes like cancer amongst the living. So it's a wonderful film, all about what people want from life, what they think about life, and how that can make others suffer. You know, it's a great voice cast. You know, there's a wonderful touch. You've got a Jewish actor, Ron Perlman, played a Italian fascist, which is quite a nice little touch that only Del Toro would pull off. Next, we have Mad God, the Phil Tippett film about... It's hard to explain this one. It's a stop-motion animation epic. It is a film that, again, whether you love or hate, it's full of short parts of the stories that connect up into one bigger story. It's very difficult to explain. It's just about set a post-apocalyptic future where mankind is barely surviving, and everything's doom and gloom, but the charm of the filmmaking, the stop-motion filmmaking, this very dark future about how mankind is surviving or not surviving, how it's a very personal film. You can sense it's a very personal film. It's very hard to explain. I've done a video on it. Go see the video where I can probably explain better than I can now, but it's just a wonderful stop-motion film. So that's another one that really affected me this year. Then we would go back to the beginning of the year with The Tragedy of Macbeth, which was released on iTunes. I mean, it was basically released, I think some people got it in the cinema early, but we pretty much got it this year. So it's a wonderful film. Joe Coen directed without his brother. It's flawed film, but the high points really work. So I definitely include it in this as a really good film. It's been kind of forgotten since it was released, though. That's the weird thing, is it was released to a lot of praise and it was just instantly forgotten, and it's like, that's a bit of a shame, because there's a lot to it. Then there's the Batman, the Matt Reeves taking Batman with Robert Pattinson as a Cape Crusader. That's a very dark taking Batman, aren't they all, these days? I mean, where's the Man in Tights stuff? But it is a really enjoyable film. It's 3 hours long. It's a bit over long, but it's really well made. It's definitely not for everybody, but it did really well. I think people really appreciate it as a detective story with Batman rather than another big action movie. And it's very different from the Justice League stuff, so it's a nice little change of pace. Then we have Nightmare Alley, another Del Toro film. This is a remake of an old film, although really it's an adaptation of the book that was already been adapted before. It's terrific. You know, it's a bit long, but there's a lot of story in there. It's really atmospheric, and it's a wonderful sense of human corruption and how people destroy themselves. Even when they have it good, they can't help but ruin themselves because of something just innate in them. So it's a very typical Del Toro film. And finally, we have the silly one. The silly number 10 is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which does have plot problems. You know, yeah, it's very messy, the script. But the brio that Sam Raimi brings to the film, and just the enjoyment, there's big silliness to it, I really enjoyed. So, I mean, it's one of those films that's like, I can see why some people don't like it, but I really enjoyed it, so I don't really care. Because if I like something, I like it. I don't care what other people think. So, it's not been an amazing year, but I would say like the top 5 of even the top 6 of all very strong films. And after that, there was a slight step down, but it's still a pretty good year. There's some really good stuff in here that you should see. But again, I haven't seen everything that's come out, so there might be some other films that I haven't seen that are wonderful. So it's one of those ones that's like, it's a year that started really strong and there was getting good points throughout. And to be honest, I didn't really get to the bad ones till later on in the year. We had some bad films, but there were films I thought were fun because they were batshit insane, which were like Moonfall, which is someone I've done a video on. It's utterly insane. It's indefensible as a script, but it's really enjoyable for how terrible it is. It's just wonderfully terrible. Then we have Ambulance, Michael Bay one, which is also incoherent to script. It's insane, it's way too long, it's self-indulgent, but it's very enjoyable. It's very silly. I had a blast with it. There was also Carter, which is a Korean film that's utterly insane and way over the top and has no self-control. I couldn't describe it as a good film, but I could describe it as a very entertaining film. All these three films have that in common. I couldn't describe them as good, but I could describe them as very entertaining. There's other ones that are kind of rubbish and were pretty boring with it. I mean, there was Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which I did not have a good time with at all. And there was Jurassic World Dominion, which was also another one that dragged on forever and had lots of subplots that were boring, and it just did not work. But it made a lot of money, so I'm going to do another one, but it's one of those ones like, please hire someone who can write next time. There's some other dubious films like Morbius that was so bad it's a good film that in no way can be counted as a good film, but Matt Smith as the villain kept it going. It's really not a good film, but I did enjoy how terrible it was. It had that kind of feel to it. Now, the worst films of the year, there's three films I thought were really terrible. Really, really terrible. And this was The Munsters, Clerks 3, and the Robert Zemeckis version of Pinocchio. Now, I've done videos in the first two. There will be a video up for about the Pinocchios, which I mentioned earlier. These three were shockers, because you don't get in this list unless the director making them has talent. For me, it has to be a director with talent who are just been self-indulgent and doing things like, what the hell are you doing? I don't like putting things in lists from directors who are just not that good anyway. It has to be someone who's actually made something good and is now doing something utterly insane. And what's worse than Monsters was a passion project. I think Clerks 3, there was some passion involved. Pinocchio, I don't know, honestly. But they just turned out really terribly, and it was like, wow, that's really awful. Now, there was some, I wouldn't call them runners-up as much as the films I liked that were flawed, that were obviously flawed, but I still enjoyed them, like Pleasure, which was a film about the porn industry. There was Duel, which was starred Karen Gillan as 2 parts, which is about a person being cloned and have to fight the clone of themselves and what you do to survive. But it's really about the kind of compromise in life and how life can. So how do you end up being a depressed person? And it uses the cloning thing and all this other stuff to actually get to the meat of the matter, which is why did people's lives fail? So it was a nice little film, very enjoyable, very different. It got ignored, obviously. Amsterdam, which got a lot of hate from people, I enjoyed it. It is flawed, but I enjoyed it. France, which was a satire. I'm not sure if it was released this year in France, but it came over here this year. Elvis, which is a biography, probably ignored something about Elvis, but it was a very enjoyable theatrical experience, really. I wouldn't say it's not as good as the John Carpenter version, but it was enjoyable, over-the-top stuff by Baz Luhrmann, who can be hit or miss. The director. There's X, which is another one about the porn industry. That's a horror movie. I've not seen Pearl yet. I'll probably see it next year. But I enjoyed X. I really enjoyed X. Terrifier 2 is another one I really enjoyed. A horror movie that was pretty brutal and didn't care that much about people's sensibilities. I've done a video on that one. Jackass Forever, enjoyable silliness. Confess Fletch, which is a nice little reboot of the Fletch franchise, starring John Hamm. It was really enjoyable. Thor Love and Thunder, which was generally hated. I enjoyed it, but I can see why people hate it, but it's one of those ones that's like, yeah, it's messy and there's lots of plot holes, but I still enjoyed the vibe of it. There was a lot of strong stuff in there amid some of the plot holes. It's just one of those ones that you have to look beyond some of the mistakes. There's Nope, the Jordan Peele film, which another one that's very eccentric. I enjoyed it, but I can tell why other people didn't enjoy it. So it's one of those ones that it's not for everybody. Top Gun Maverick, I'm not really a Top Gun fan, but I enjoyed this one. It was well made, wholesome. You know, it's not as good as some of the people who adore it say, but it's still well made. It's still really enjoyably done for what it is. Halloween Ends, a very divisive film that some people absolutely loathe. I really, really liked this one, but it did go off on a side tangent, showing you how another guy who could become the next Michael Myers and what's that how that evolves through the film. Then there's The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, another one I've done a video on, Nicolas Cage, all about an egotistical actor. It's a really enjoyable film. There were some other ones that were very entertaining, like Accident Man, Man's Holiday, Last Looks, which was a nice little film noir with Charlie Hunnam. Men, which was very flawed, but kind of enjoyable. But these are a bit lower than the ones I've just mentioned for me. There's Hellraiser reboot, Bodies. Christmas Bloody Christmas, which I'm going to do a video on this week. The Kingsman, See Where They Run. And, you know, that's about it really. Those were kind of just fun movies. I mean, they weren't like amazing or anything. They had all of them had their problems, but I got a lot of fun out of them. You know, they were, you know, they're basically B movies. Although the men thinks they're more than a B movie, but it's not really. That's what was annoying about that film. Is like, I thought it was more than it actually was. But these other ones I just mentioned here are basically B movies that I had some fun with. You know, sometimes there's a bit of pretensions, but mostly they were B movies. And they flawed, enjoyable ones, they varied as well. So it was a pretty decent year. I wouldn't say it was an amazing year. They had a couple of really good highlights, and there was some nice stuff went out. But most of the stuff I watched this year were from other years. I had a good year of watching films, and most of the stuff I watched was from different years, because I tend to catch up into things anyway. So I'm not really keen on having to see everything as it's released that year. So it's not that big a deal to me. So this is a very basic list. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm not going to rant on for much longer. There will be a rant when it comes to one of the Pinocchio films coming soon. I hope you enjoy that when it comes. And that's me for now. I'll see you later. Bye.